In 1848, Marx published one of his most famous, and in some ways most notorious works, the Communist Manifesto, a text that is part of the revolutionary politics of continental Europe in the mid-19th century, an age of turbulence and revolution, of which Marx is fully a part. But the Communist Manifesto is more than that. It's a text that represents Marx developing economic theory, his basic philosophy, but also his outlook on history. And to understand Marx, his thought, to understand Marxism, you have to understand the extent to which it is a philosophy of history, the extent to which it's grounded in an understanding of how history has transformed human societies. And the thesis that Marx offers about history is that Europe has gone and is undergoing a transformation from feudalism to capitalism. And so it's important that we understand what Marx means by feudalism and what he means by a capitalist system. Marx sees feudalism as a kind of society. There's not one feudal society, but as a typical pattern of social arrangements in which people are embedded in their society. This is exactly what Henry Sumner Maine would have called a society based on status rather than contract. A society that is somehow ordered, that is hierarchical, that is organically connected by certain relationships that are given. It's somewhat difficult for us to understand, but think of some of the institutions we've already talked about in this society. For instance, land ownership. Remember Thomas Jefferson had placed such enormous importance on the fact that the land in the colonies was owned by the American colonists under what he called fee simple or allodial tenure. Now those are obscure, forgotten terms because they come from a lost feudal medieval world. What that meant was that the farmer owned their land absolutely. They had dominion, they had complete property rights over that land, that it was unencumbered by any set of feudal obligations. And opposed to that, Jefferson believed, was feudal tenure, some kind of tenure that was bound up in a whole complex hierarchy or network of social obligations that were a part of a status system, that the king could grant land with certain encumbrances, certain kinds of tenurial obligations that a lord, by holding that land, owed the king loyalty and certain kinds of army service. This is part of a feudal order, a hierarchy, king, lord, knight, serf, status-based. People are born into it. It's a world in which property is not held completely in individual dominion. And so this is the kind of landholding that's characteristic of the feudal order. A feudal order where social arrangements are customary, where even things like prices are customary. The feudal world is a world where prices are considered to be natural, that they're based on something's usefulness, that there is something as a just price. Part of the feudal world, a small agricultural world where there's a limited number of commodities, is the idea that you could know the just price of something. There's something intuitive about that there's a price that is appropriate for something, that it's somehow natural, that it's tied to its usefulness. This too is part of a feudal order for Marx. Marx sees all of this swept away by the rise of capitalism, that capitalism overruns and eventually transforms the whole feudal order, that it does so in property relationships by creating specifically the kinds of absolute property rights that are essential for capitalism, that it does so by sweeping away the orders of society and creating societies where people are free and equal. And in fact, Marx sees the American and French revolutions as what he would call quintessentially bourgeois revolutions. That is, that they're revolutions that allow individuals to have what he calls bourgeois freedom. The freedom to be equal and the freedom to be left to do what you want on your own. Marx sees this kind of equal freedom as sweeping away the old status-based institutions of the feudal world. How does the American Declaration of Independence begin? It says that all men are created equal. And Marx sees this as part of the transformation from an ancient status-based world to a modern capitalist world. And so for Marx, his theory of justice is grounded in an understanding of history and the transformation from feudalism to capitalism. And Marx sees this as ushering in a new legal and constitutional order that's grounded in individual rights, that's grounded in the idea that the individual is naturally free and possesses himself and is an individual contracting agent. And he sees it as a change that has swept away the old institutions of feudal hierarchy and has replaced those with a new capitalist hierarchy, with now a division between the bourgeois and the proletariat. And so an ancient society, a medieval society, a feudal society that was based on some status arrangements, whether masters and slaves, whether lords and serfs, in which relations were customary, in which people were born as serfs and they owed their lords certain customary obligations. That kind of hierarchy has been swept away. And in its place is a new social order where everyone is free and equal. But at the same time, there is a new kind of hierarchy. Although everyone is nominally free and equal, some people own property. They own the means of production. These are, for Marx, the bourgeois. Those without property, who must live off their wages, are the proletariats. And Marx thinks that the capitalist system is one of exploitation, in which those who own the means of production exploit the proletariat who lack the means of production. And he sees the essential point of this exploitation in the arrangement of the wage contract. And for Marx, the wage contract is no guarantee of justice. Indeed, in the world that he lives in, he believes that it is a profound violation of transactional justice.